Which one innovation from this brand taught you the life lesson that no mentor ever could? To understand the answer, you first have to understand this. Most people see a product. I saw a blueprint for life. Here's the truth they don't tell you. Subscribe so you don't miss. If I asked you to name the most successful motor vehicle in human history, your brain would probably jump straight to cars. You might think of the legendary Ford Model T, which sold around 15 million units and put America on wheels. Or maybe you'd guess the iconic Volkswagen Beetle, which sold an astonishing 21 million units worldwide. But you would be completely wrong. The greatest, most produced, most globally dominant internal combustion vehicle in the history of the planet is this: the Honda Super Cub. Today, we're taking a massive deep dive into the legend of the Honda Super Cub. From a $3,800 modern retro classic back to its desperate beginnings in the 1950s, we're going to uncover the brilliant, borderline insane engineering that made it indestructible. We are going to reveal the catastrophic mechanical failure that almost destroyed the company in its first month. I'm going to introduce a completely unique concept to explain its success: the theory of invisible technology. If you think this is just a boring scooter, you are profoundly mistaken. Stick around, because the story of this tiny plastic motorcycle involves corporate gambles, cultural revolutions, and the absolute mastery of human psychology. Let's ride. To understand the genius of the Super Cub, you have to understand how absolutely terrible the motorcycle industry was in the mid-1950s. Motorcycles back then belonged to two distinct categories, and both of them were flawed. On one side of the spectrum, you had the heavyweights, brands like Harley-Davidson in America and Triumph or Norton in Great Britain. These were massive, heavy, oil-leaking machines that required a degree in mechanical engineering just to keep them running. You had to operate a heavy manual clutch, manually adjust the spark timing, and kickstart them with enough force to break your ankle if the engine kicked back. Because of this, motorcycles were exclusively the domain of hardcore enthusiasts, mechanics, and, increasingly in the US, outlaws. On the other side of the spectrum, mostly in Europe, you had mopeds and scooters. These were tiny, underpowered bicycles with clip-on engines. They were cheap, but they were fragile. Their tiny 12-inch wheels were lethal on unpaved, pothole-riddled roads, and their two-stroke engines required the rider to manually mix oil and gasoline in a jug before pouring it into the tank. Motorcycles were not for the masses. They were loud, dirty, complicated, and intimidating. Enter two men who were about to change the world. Soichiro Honda, a brilliant, hot-tempered engineering genius, and Takeo Fujisawa, a visionary businessman and marketing savant. In 1956, the two men took a trip to Europe to study the moped market. They watched people puttering around Germany on tiny two-stroke machines. Honda wanted to build something similar, maybe a slightly better scooter to compete, but Fujisawa stopped him. Fujisawa realized that a European scooter wouldn't survive in Japan. In the late 50s, only about 10% of the roads in Japan were paved. The rest were rutted, muddy, destroyed dirt tracks left over from the devastation of World War II. A scooter with tiny wheels would simply sink into the mud and crash. Fujisawa looked at Honda and delivered one of the most specific, legendary design briefs in automotive history. He said the new vehicle had to meet two impossible criteria. First, a delivery boy carrying a tray of soba noodles must be able to ride it with one hand. Second, a woman wearing a skirt must be able to straddle and ride it with complete dignity. If Soichiro Honda could build a machine that did those two things while surviving the apocalyptic roads of rural Japan, Fujisawa promised he could sell an astronomical 30,000 units a month. At the time, the entire Japanese motorcycle industry combined only sold 40,000 units a month. It sounded like pure delusion, but Soichiro Honda loved a challenge. But how do you make a motorcycle that requires no left hand to operate the clutch, no left foot to kick a shifter, doesn't ruin your clothes with oil, and doesn't get stuck in the mud. Honda had to invent an entirely new genre of vehicle. This brings us to a concept I call the theory of invisible technology. The greatest inventions in human history are the ones that completely hide their complexity from the user. Think about the smartphone. Inside, there are billions of microscopic transistors performing trillions of calculations a second, but the user just swipes a piece of glass with their thumb. The technology is invisible. In 1957, Soichiro Honda applied this exact theory to the motorcycle. He wanted the user to experience the joy of mobility without ever having to think about the violent, explosive mechanical forces happening between their legs. Let's look at how he achieved this invisible technology. First, the engine. In the 50s, every small motorcycle used a two-stroke engine. They were light, cheap, and produced good power. But they were loud, they spewed blue smoke, they required the user to mix oil into the fuel, and they were notoriously unreliable. Soichiro Honda absolutely hated two-strokes. He demanded that the Super Cub have a four-stroke engine. His engineers told him he was crazy. A 50cc four-stroke engine would be too heavy and too slow, but Honda pushed them relentlessly. They experimented with massive valves, entirely new cooling fins, and custom-ordered spark plugs from manufacturers who thought Honda was out of his mind. The result was a 50cc OHV four-stroke engine that produced 4.5 horsepower. To put that in perspective, Honda's previous clip-on bicycle engine produced just 1 horsepower. This new engine revved to an astonishing 9,500 RPM. It was a microscopic marvel of engineering. It was quiet, it was incredibly fuel efficient, it didn't spew blue smoke on your clothes, and it ran on pure, straight gasoline from the pump. But a good engine wasn't enough. They had to fix the wheels. Scooters had 12-inch wheels, which fell into potholes and crashed. Full-size motorcycles had 19-inch wheels, which made the bike too tall for the average Japanese citizen to comfortably flat-foot at a stoplight. Soichiro Honda calculated that the mathematically perfect wheel size for the Super Cub was 17 inches. There was just one problem. Nobody on Earth manufactured a 17-inch motorcycle tire.
Honda aggressively lobbied a small, reluctant Japanese rubber manufacturer to custom-build 17-inch tires specifically for his unproven conceptual motorcycle. Those 17-inch wheels gave the Super Cub the gyroscopic stability of a real motorcycle, allowing it to glide over massive potholes and dirt roads without throwing the rider into the ditch. We have a clean engine, we have perfect wheels, but we still haven't solved Takeo Fujisawa's ultimate demand, the soba noodle rule. How do you ride a motorcycle with one hand? On a traditional motorcycle, your left hand pulls a heavy clutch lever to disconnect the engine from the transmission, while your left foot clicks a gear lever up or down. If you don't coordinate this perfectly, the bike stalls and you look like an idiot. It requires 2 hands, 2 feet, and a lot of mental bandwidth. If the Super Cub was going to be for everyone, the clutch lever had to die. Soichiro Honda locked his lead transmission engineer, Mr. Akima, in a room and told him to figure it out. Akima went through 8 completely different, failed designs. The pressure was immense. The stories say that Soichiro Honda would burst into the design room every morning yelling, "How's it going?" And if the discussions got heated, Honda would literally grab a piece of chalk and start frantically drawing diagrams on the blackboard. Finally, they achieved the miracle, the automatic centrifugal clutch. Here is how this piece of invisible technology works. When the engine is idling at a stoplight, the clutch is disengaged. You can sit there in gear and the bike won't stall. When you twist the throttle with your right hand, the engine spins faster. Inside the engine, weights on springs are flung outward by centrifugal force. As they fly outward, they physically grab the clutch bell, smoothly transferring the power to the rear wheel.
When you want to shift gears, you simply press down on the foot pedal. The very act of pressing the pedal automatically disengages the clutch, shifts the gear, and re-engages it when you lift your foot. No left hand required. A delivery boy could hold a stack of noodle bowls in his left hand, twist the throttle with his right hand, and click through the gears with his left foot. It was seamless. It removed all the terror, all the stalling, and all the mechanical intimidation from riding a motorcycle. It was the seamless interface applied to a transmission. Finally, they wrapped the whole thing in a swooping step-through steel frame so a woman in a skirt didn't have to awkwardly swing her leg over a gas tank, and they added a massive, white polyethylene plastic leg shield to protect the rider's clothes from wind, rain, and road dirt. In August 1958, the Honda C100 Super Cub was officially born. It was a masterpiece. And it almost immediately destroyed the entire company. Building a great prototype is one thing. Mass manufacturing is a completely different beast. Takeo Fujisawa, the business genius, had essentially bet the entire financial future of Honda on the Super Cub. To meet his insane goal of 30,000 units a month, Honda borrowed astronomical sums of money to build the Suzuka factory, a massive, state-of-the-art facility modeled directly after the Volkswagen Beetle plant in Germany. At the time it was completed in 1960, it was the largest motorcycle factory on the planet. If the Super Cub failed, Honda Motor Company would go bankrupt instantly. In the first few months of 1958, sales were slow. Japan was in the middle of an economic recession, but worse than the slow sales was the terrifying news coming from the service departments. The brilliant world-first centrifugal clutch? It had a flaw. Under heavy load, the clutches were slipping. Customers who had trusted this new, strange plastic motorcycle were getting stranded on hills. The very component that was supposed to make the bike idiot-proof was failing in the real world. In the modern era, a massive corporate recall is handled by sending a polite letter in the mail and blaming a supplier. But this was 1950s Honda. The honor of the company was on the line. Soichiro Honda halted the assembly lines. He demanded the engineers completely redesign the clutch friction materials overnight. But what about the thousands of defective bikes already in the hands of customers? Every single Honda salesman, every factory worker, and every manager gave up their holidays. They packed the newly redesigned clutch parts into their bags, and they physically traveled to the homes of every single customer who had bought a Super Cub. They knocked on doors, bowed in apology, and rebuilt the engines in the customers' driveways, free of charge. This unbelievable display of customer service and accountability changed everything. The Japanese public realized that Honda wasn't just another faceless corporation. They stood behind their product. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. By 1959, the factory was churning out 167,000 units. By 1960, the new Suzuka factory hit full stride, producing 500,000 units. By 1962, Honda was selling nearly 800,000 Super Cubs a year in Japan alone. Takeo Fujisawa's impossible dream of 30,000 a month had been completely shattered. They were building a tidal wave of motorcycles. The Super Cub had conquered Japan. Now, it was time to conquer the world. Conquering Japan was an incredible feat, but the real prize was the United States. In 1959, Honda established the American Honda Motor Company. When Honda arrived in Los Angeles and tried to sell their tiny, quiet 50cc step-through plastic motorcycle, American motorcycle dealers literally laughed them out of the showrooms. Takeo Fujisawa realized that trying to sell the Super Cub to existing motorcycle riders was a massive mistake. They needed to sell the Super Cub to people who had never considered riding a motorcycle. In 1963, Honda launched what is widely considered one of the greatest, most effective advertising campaigns in the history of global capitalism. The slogan was simple: "You meet the nicest people on a Honda." They didn't advertise in motorcycle magazines. They bought massive, expensive full-page ads in Life magazine, Look, and the Saturday Evening Post. The advertisements featured college students carrying textbooks, housewives buying groceries, and men in sharp business suits, all smiling and riding the brightly colored Super Cub. It was a total cultural reset. The Super Cub became a massive, undeniable pop culture phenomenon. It was cheap, it got over 100 miles to the gallon, and suddenly every college campus in America was swarming with them. Honda had successfully hacked the American psyche. They completely normalized two-wheeled transportation. But while the Super Cub was a fun, trendy toy for American teenagers, on the other side of the world, it was about to become something entirely different. It was about to become the backbone of an entire continent's survival.
The Super Cub gave mobility to millions of people who previously had to walk. It carried farmers to markets, children to schools, and entire families to new lives. By 2005, global production surpassed 50 million units. By 2017, it crossed the 100 million mark. It never stopped evolving. Honda added a 70cc version, a 90cc version, and an overhead cam in the late 60s, and electronic fuel injection in the 2000s to meet emission standards. If you walk into a Honda dealership right now, you can buy a brand new Honda Super Cub C125. It costs roughly $3,800. Why do people pay a premium for a retro pair of Nike Air Force Ones or Adidas Sambas when there are vastly superior, more modern running shoes available? Because of the heritage, because of the aesthetic. When you buy a Super Cub today, you are buying a piece of industrial art. You are buying the machine that mobilized Asia, the machine that changed American culture, and the machine that proved Soichiro Honda was a genius. The deepest lesson from this story is the theory of invisible technology. It's not just a masterclass in engineering, it's the ultimate blueprint for your life and your career. The #1 life lesson: true success belongs to those who create ease for others. The more invisible and frictionless your work becomes, the higher its value. In a world of noise, being the silent solution is your greatest competitive advantage. Life lesson #2. The greatest lesson any mentor can teach you is that empathy is the foundation of all innovation. Life lesson #3. Honor and trust aren't built on shortcuts, they are forged in the fire of difficult times. Making a mistake isn't the end, but running from one is. It was Honda's service mentality, standing by their riders when things got tough, that took them to 110 million units. That's how you build a legend. The fourth and final life lesson: never fear labels or a bad reputation. If your intent is pure and your character is solid, you don't just survive the noise, you change the entire society's perspective. So, there it is, the Honda Super Cub. What about you? Have you ever thrown a leg over a Honda Super Cub, a Passport, or any of its clones? Did your parents ride one? Let me know your stories in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the absolute peak of motorcycle history, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next video.